Schoolers, today is a very special day. It feels momentous, it feels celebratory. We're meeting in person at 10:45 at both our locations. Finally, we're kicking off a brand new series this morning called This or That. We just launched into phase 3, I guess. Not everything has changed, but I know that some things are changing involving you and your school plans. And I think this series is going to be pretty relevant considering. So speaking of school, let's talk about things like science and math and measuring tools. Seriously, at this point, you have to know that there are 2 competing measurement standards in the world. In Europe, the standard measuring system is called the metric system. There, they use things like grams, meters, and liters to measure distance, weight, and more. Here, we measure distances with inches, feet, and miles, and use things like teaspoons, tablespoons, and ounces for other measurements. Now, while we may have different standards for measuring things like, I don't know, how much flour we put into a cake we're making, or how far it is from our house to our best friend's house, there's one standard of measurement that all people use, whether they realize it or not: comparison. Comparison is simply when we measure something about ourselves against something about someone else. We take this about ourselves and measure it against that about someone else. You think that this pair of Adidas that you have is awesome until you see that pair the kid in your small group has. You think this grade you got on your paper is really great until you hear about that grade your best friend got. You think this guy you're dating is pretty cute until you see that guy your best friend is dating. See what I mean? Comparison is the way that we measure this in our lives against that in someone else's. And it affects more of our lives than we probably even realize. But here's the thing about comparison. It can lead us to believe things that just aren't true, things about ourselves and others. See, when we compare ourselves to others, we can start to believe their lives are better than ours in some way because they have so many followers on Instagram, or made the game-winning shot, or got to take that girl to the school dance. Their lives are pretty much perfect. They have everything they could ever want and everything that we want. And because of that, we assume their lives are amazing, even though we may know that's not true because nobody's life is actually perfect. The comparison still leaves us feeling like ours will never measure up to theirs. And when that happens, well, we respond in some pretty wild ways, don't we? Some of us may feel disappointment. We see what others have and wonder, why not me? And we get disappointed with what we have. Maybe we get frustrated. We just don't think it's fair. I mean, I deserve to have cool stuff as much as they do. And maybe for you, the feeling that comparison brings into your life is hopelessness. You see those things that others have, and you feel as though you'll never have the fun they're having or go the places they're going. Or maybe, and this is kind of wild, maybe comparison motivates you. Instead of giving up, you decide to try harder and push faster and do whatever you have to do to get to where they are. And while motivation and hard work aren't bad things, they can be unhealthy when comparison is the reason behind them. And maybe you actually feel really good about yourself. You see what you have and how others don't have it, and you may even begin to feel as though you're better than them. Because in comparison, you're doing great. Now, regardless of how comparison makes you feel about yourself or others, it's never enough. You may actually arrive, but you'll then look around again and compare to something else or someone else, and the cycle never ends. And you end up struggling with those same feelings of disappointment and frustration and hopelessness and more all over again. And I don't believe that's what God intended. So today we're going to look at a letter that was written by a guy named Paul. Now, Paul was a leader in the spread of Christian faith, and he often wrote letters to encourage believers in churches in different areas. In the letter we're going to look at today, Paul addressed issues born out of comparison to a group of church members in a city called Corinth. Now, here's what he said. "Oh, don't worry. We wouldn't dare say that we are as wonderful as these other men who tell you how important they are, but they are only comparing themselves with each other, using themselves as the standard of measurement. How ignorant. 2 Corinthians 10:12. Even though Paul was specifically talking about some false teachers who were bragging about their spirituality, the same truth applies to us today. Paul's telling us, listen, comparing yourself to other people stinks. It's not smart, it's not wise, it's not helpful, so let's just not do that, okay? I think what Paul wanted us to know is that when we compare ourselves to each other, we're using the wrong measurement. When we hold our real life up to someone's life on social media, when we compare the way our family looks to the way another person's family looks, when we look at what we have in comparison to what someone else has, well, we'll always end up on the losing end. And that's because we're looking in the wrong place. And I know this is true not only because of the way comparison makes us feel, but because of something else Paul said in this very same letter. Take a look at how he closes out the chapter. When people were commended or compliment or praise themselves, it doesn't count for much. The important thing is for the Lord to commend them. 2 Corinthians 10:18. It's not about how we measure up in comparison to other people. It's not about how our this stands in comparison to their that. As Paul said, that doesn't count for much. But what does count is this, how God sees us. That is our standard, the place we can look to see how we measure up. And the good news is this, God doesn't compare you to others. How do I know this? Well, because of Jesus. We can look at the way Jesus treated people while he was here on earth as proof of how God sees us today. Jesus didn't rank the people around him from best to worst. He didn't compare one single person, even to his own perfection. Instead, he turned the whole system upside down, basing the way he sees all people on one thing and one thing alone, God's love. See, God isn't using the people around you as some sort of measuring stick to determine your worth or value. Instead, he is simply looking at you through his eyes. He's seeing your life through his love. Like a father. Hey, I'm a dad. I don't compare my 3 kids against one another and love them based upon who ranks the best. No, I love my kids because they're my kids. God is a perfect father, meaning that he sees you as his child. His love isn't based upon comparison, but based upon you being his. Followers of Jesus are God's beloved children. So since this is true, since God doesn't compare you to others, then what can we do to stop comparing ourselves? There's just one more truth I want to share with you that I think can help. It's some wisdom from a book called Proverbs that will give us an idea of where to start. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Proverbs 4:23. You see, comparison starts in our hearts. It starts because something in us feels unhappy with this in our lives when we see it compared to that in someone else's. So if we want to avoid that feeling, we have to stop it where it starts, our hearts. As this proverb says, we have to guard our hearts. So here are some ways you can guard your heart. Pay attention to your feelings. Notice the way your mood or outlook changes when you start to compare yourself to someone else. What do we say? Disappointment, frustration, anger, anxiety, right? Those feelings may be clues that you're heading down the path of comparison. They're a signal that you need to guard your heart. Secondly, find out what's fueling it. What are you looking at, thinking about, or doing when you start to have those feelings? What's fueling your negative feelings of comparison? Is it a post on social media, a TV show, a circumstance in your life you wish was different? If it's something in your control, take a step away from it. Close the app, turn off the TV, take a break from that friend group for a day or two. Take a step to guard your heart from the things that cause you to compare. And if it's something you can't control, talk to somebody. Maybe you're unhappy with something in your home life, or you have a friend that you're jealous of, or you'd wish you'd gotten the top spot on your team. Things like that can cause you to compare. And I encourage you, your small group leader is a great person to help you identify steps that you can take to change and guard your heart in those areas. And lastly, celebrate what you have. Instead of filling your heart with comparison, fill it with the acknowledgement of the things you do have, the things that you're thankful for, the things that you like about yourself in your life. And again, not the awesome things that you've accomplished, which is great, but no. The way God sees you, that's the best place to start. Make a list of the ways He sees you and send an encouraging text to someone you appreciate. Or write down all of the things you're grateful for in your life. And when you're tempted to compare, fill that space in your heart with gratitude. Fill it with something that reminds you of the truth that God doesn't compare you to others. Now, I think this has probably gotten out of control for some of you over quarantine. And for others, going back to school kicks this into high gear. It's something we all struggle with in different areas of our lives. The good thing is that we don't have to struggle alone. One of the reasons we have small groups is to give you a place to talk about these things and become more aware of them. So look, we're going to small groups today, but here's the deal. I want you to think about this question. How does comparing myself to others usually make me feel? Now, since we're meeting in person, again, we're not dropping a small group video this week, but I am putting up the questions here at the end of this video. So take some time and go through them. If you're not able to join us in person, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you. DM us on Insta, because we're not meeting in person doesn't mean we can't stay connected. And regardless of when you decide to come back, we cannot wait to see you. All right,